This allows you to fully rebuild the defense and revamp it in a manner that's going to help you win football games, especially in January and hopefully February. Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome on into the Space Cowboy Show. I hope you guys are having a great day today, because what we're going to be talking about in today's video is an early 2026 free agency preview for the Dallas Cowboys. Look, I understand the season just began, so of course it feels a bit awkward to talk about free agency upcoming next year. But the reason I'm doing this video is to ensure that you guys are familiar with the names that are set to hit the free agent market, or restricted free agents, or have another tag associated with that. So then, as we're going through the year, we can be like, hey, here's some notable names we talked about that we can go back to this video and be like, these are the guys we were looking out for. Are they worthy of being re-signed? Are they just backups? Would we want to bring them back? That's the type of dialogue that I want to start as the season goes on. Before we go any further, if you could please hit the like button, that'd be greatly appreciated. Subscribe if you're new to the channel so you get more Cowboys content in your feed. Also, hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on new content or if I go live. And finally, feel free to join in on the discussion down in the comment section below. So we're going to go ahead and look at the list of guys, starting off with who you brought in or re-signed on a one-year deal. We're not talking about trade acquisitions, restricted free agents, anything like that. It's strictly guys that are here or were brought back on one-year deals that are still on the team. So looking at the list here, you have the notable names of Miles Sanders, Javonte Williams, Robert Jones, Hakeem Adeniji, Dante Fowler, Peyton Turner, Jack Sanborn, and CJ Goodwin. Out of all those names, the notable ones that I'm keeping an eye out on, and so should you, are these: Javonte Williams, Dante Fowler, Jack Sanborn, and CJ Goodwin. Now, starting things off with CJ Goodwin, to be honest with you, I don't really need to go deeper than what we've already known who CJ Goodwin is, who is a special teams ace for you that's been around for quite some time, and he's been getting the one-year minimal deals that we've been giving him. So I'm expecting the Cowboys to re-sign him unless he retires or something else happens, unless he gets a bigger deal from another team or he wants to go somewhere else, but I doubt that. But going to the three notable names that I brought up, the guys that you brought in for this season alone in unrestricted free agency: Javonte Williams, you talk about bringing back Dante Fowler, and then also bringing in Jack Sanborn. With Javonte Williams, it's a veteran presence in the running back room that still has a little bit of juice to him, and you're kind of seeing that guy that was prior to being injured, and I think that what we want to see moving forward is him getting a bit more carries, but ensuring that he's getting efficient carries at that as well. I've always looked at either bringing back Rico Dowdle or Javonte Williams as the bridge to the two rookies you currently have on roster, which is Phil Maffa and Jadon Blue. So I'm not really looking to bring back Javonte Williams as a 3-year starter or something to that effect. I could probably see him getting a cheap 1 to 2 year deal from the Cowboys, depending on how he does this year. Again, we still need to see how he produces as a running back, especially with what we're trying to do schematically with running the football. But I would expect the Cowboys to still do a running back by committee approach, and if he were to get an offer in the offseason, I wouldn't expect it to be much. And now going to the defensive side of the ball with Dante Fowler, we understand you brought him in to be a solid edge presence for your team, specifically on the defense. Now that Micah Parsons is gone, you're going to need a little bit more from your edge room. Similar to how I talked about Javonte Williams, I'm saying the same thing about Dante Fowler. I've looked at him as a bridge piece to the younger defensive ends that you have on this roster, notably Marshawn Kneeland as well as Donovan Ezeraku. With Dante Fowler and seeing how he did in Washington to bring him back, I really think we need to see more from him. I've seen a bit of issues of him containing the edge. Again, it's just one game, so I'm not trying to put too much of an effort into saying that he sucks or anything like that, which I'm not implying here whatsoever. But I feel like similar to the situation of talking about a guy like Javonte Williams and being that bridge to the other guys, I think it's the same thing. But I would say there is more of a likelihood that Fowler isn't back unless the money is right for the Cowboys. And finally with Jack Sanborn, he was a guy that I was really high on. He was one of the notable names that I thought was out of the list of guys that you brought in unrestricted free agency, no trades, nothing like that. He was the best because of what I saw on film when it came to what he did in Chicago. The fact that, again, he wasn't tendered by the Bears is a surprise to me. But he was a bit disappointing in that debut. But again, I'm not expecting much from one game. If we start seeing more and more film where it's showing like, yo, this guy isn't what you think he was, then we're going to be like, all right, we can just let him walk. But again, knowing how your linebacker room is, and again, going to that Micah Parsons trade, this is where you need to create a bit of roster stability, bringing back guys that you're adding into this defense, and obviously him being in a system that maybe should work for him, because obviously with Matt Eberflus and him being basically a linebacker whisperer like we've seen what he did here in Dallas for a little bit of time, I'm really hoping that that can rub off on our linebackers. And especially when DeMarvion Overshown comes back, I think it's going to help ease the pressure on what we're expecting from these linebackers as well. Now, the next category of players that I wanted to talk about were guys that you acquired via trade that are, again, on a one-year contract / expiring contract that are set to hit the open market next year. So looking at those particular names, you have guys like Kaiir Elam, Kenneth Murray, and George Pickens that are set to hit the free market as unrestricted free agents in 2026. Now, out of those names, the one name that obviously everyone is going to be looking at is George Pickens. George Pickens is going to be the perfect complement to CeeDee Lamb. In fact, we even saw little bits of it during the game in Philadelphia, where I understand that he didn't have as big of a showing, but his impact on drawing defensive pass interference penalties, and for CeeDee Lamb, making sure he's not being mugged or completely blanketed by the defense. You know, he is a very talented player, but when you're looking at how to attack the Cowboys offensively and trying to see how you can shut him down, last year we saw that if you can eliminate CeeDee Lamb, this whole offense just sputters. This year, I think with the elements of an improved running game, adding weapons in the receiving room, that is exactly where the Cowboys need a guy like George Pickens to ensure that CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, and company can thrive and allow Dak Prescott to really operate the offense and do what he needs to do, as we've seen when you give him adequate weaponry. Now, for the price tag, it's going to be expensive depending on how this year goes for him. Obviously, they're not going to give him a contract extension right now, but if he were to have a year where he has, let's just say he ends with 1,000 yards and several touchdowns, he's probably going to look northward of between $20 to $30 million. And I think that's going to be the price tag regardless of how he produces. And so you have to ask yourself, with the money that we have and are trying to save with trading away Micah Parsons and that we can open up, is George Pickens a guy that we want to pay this much money to? And I'm going to argue yes for this particular reason. As we've seen with the Philadelphia Eagles and the success they've had offensively, you're going to need two guys that can really cause problems defensively, especially when you talk about what both of them do and how they attack opposing defenses. And then on top of that, for a guy like Dak Prescott that you have already committed now for the next 3 seasons after this year has concluded, you would need to do him a solid in making sure that he has reliable pass catchers that can help him throughout the remainder of this deal if this so ends up being the last contract that he signs with the Cowboys, which I think is very much so the case. Also, this helps create, like I said, roster stability with your offense. Now, you don't have to worry about your receiver room anymore. Now what you can do is you can focus on the running backs, you can focus on your offensive line, your tight end room, and more specifically, if your core offensively is set and really the only thing that you maybe need to replace is a running back and maybe a backup tight end and maybe a right tackle or so, you're pretty much set. You're not going to have it perfect everywhere. But I think the key thing is honing in a core that offensively you can work with for the next several years. And this allows you to fully rebuild the defense and revamp it in a manner that's going to help you win football games, especially in January and hopefully February. That's where I think that, you can argue, oh, well, you're allocating so much money to the offense. You have two receivers paying so much money. Well, if you get these deals done soon, then you don't got to worry about it, right? So that's where I think the prioritization with the guys that you have on that list of you added via trade that you need to re-sign is George Pickens and no one else. In terms of Kyer Elam and Kenneth Murray, they're just guys that you have as veteran presence. They're not specifically great. I can let them just walk. I don't really care. Now, the final thing that I wanted to talk about when it came to unrestricted free agents were the rest of the dudes that are on expiring contracts that you should keep an eye out on, or maybe you could just let them go. So let's take a look at that list. So you have names like Donovan Wilson, Sam Williams, Jalen Tolbert, and Damone Clark, Brock Hoffman. These are guys where when I look at this list, in terms of guys that are set to leave the team, as you've had them for quite some time, they're on an expiring contract, really the only name on this list that I'm sitting here being like, you kind of have to re-sign them, but it's not the end of the world if you don't, is Brock Hoffman. Having offensive line depth is key in this league, and we've seen that especially when it came to the Dallas Cowboys. When you have injuries on your offensive line, you need guys that could step up. I think that a guy like Brock Hoffman's perfect, especially his flexibility to play both center and guard for you if one of your guys goes down. The benefit of what you have with your offensive line is that they're young, they're going to be building cohesion, and then by keeping those guys still on roster, especially the backups, if they need to slot in for a guy that's out for a couple weeks or out for a whole season, you can at least rely on that. The other notable name that I think you can maybe get an extension done, if maybe you can wiggle it a certain way, is a guy like Sam Williams. I don't know how much that contract is going to look like, to be honest with you. You're probably looking at paying him northward between $8 to $15 million a year, and you might think that's crazy, but the market has changed so much that realistically edge rushers at the top of that market, like we've seen with Micah Parsons, $40-45 million. I think with Sam Williams, knowing the situations that he's been through can maybe work with you to get a deal that's relatively cheap. Maybe like a Chauncey Goldstein type of deal where it's like $8 to $10 million a year, depending on how you structure it, and you can get him cheap, and you get a young guy that has a ton of potential. But again, the other factor in this, where for Sam Williams, if he's worthy of re-signing, is what happens with Marshawn Nealon? What happens with Donovan Ezeraku? And then you can go into the 2026 NFL draft with the 2 first-round picks you have and really focus in on the defense, whether that be adding an edge rusher, adding a defensive end, things like that. And because of what you did in adding Kenny Clark, you already have Osa Odigizua. I think your defensive tackle room is set, but maybe when it comes to the depth, you need to work on that, especially with Winfrey being hurt. And you might need to add a little bit more, and maybe Mozzie Smith's gone after this year, as he's just basically a depth piece for you. I really think that the Dallas Cowboys have a huge opportunity to revamp this defense because the offense is more or less set. And so looking at guys like Donovan Wilson, like Sam Williams that are set to hit free agency, and I understand that I didn't talk about Jalen Tolbert a whole lot, when we're looking at those caliber of guys, they are guys where it's like, if you bring them back on cheap contracts, that's fine, but I'm not slamming the table that you need to bring these guys back. Especially considering the fact, going over to the offensive side of the ball, you just re-signed Kevontae Turpin, who I personally think is your wide receiver 3 at this point moving forward because of the mismatches that he can create, and then just use the money to re-sign George Pickens. So, again, looking at that huge list of free agents for the Cowboys in terms of that, I think that they're just fine. And this isn't really a huge offseason where you have a lot of dudes leaving the room, and this isn't going to be a massive offseason where you're worried about a lot of dudes leaving the team that you're like, oh no, there's a huge talent depletion. How can we recover from this? Really, if you put all of the unrestricted free agents all together, the only name that you really need to get done is George Pickens. That's it, in my opinion. Now, moving over to restricted free agency, these are guys that won't hit the open market, but the Cowboys need to decide if they're going to tender them and also what that's going to look like. This is where you get guys like Wanye Thomas, James Houston, TJ Bass, John Stevens Jr., and Brandon Aubrey. I really think that out of these names, I personally think that Brandon Aubrey, you need to get done ASAP. Immediately. Like, I understand he's a restricted free agent. I understand that if a team really wants to get him, they would have to give up a second or a first-round pick, depending on the tender that you place on him. I think you need to get a deal. I really think you need to get a deal done immediately. Because if you really want to let this thing go and you really want to let this thing continue, I think you need to get Brandon Aubrey done as soon as possible. And I understand the restricted free agency and how you can tender him, and I don't think a team's going to give up a second or even a first-round pick to acquire a guy like Brandon Aubrey, but I think having a guy like him on your team is crucial. And typically with kickers, you're not going to really pay as much, but you might have to pay a pretty hefty penny for a guy like Brandon Aubrey, and I'm talking about with the market for kickers. So you're probably looking northward, maybe 10 million maybe a year. I know that's a lot for a kicker, maybe even 5 to 10. I'm going to say 5 to 10 million dollars depending on the guarantees. I think that this offseason, I'm not talking about guys that are still under contract that you need to get re-signed early. I've already touched up on why you need to do that, but there are some names that I think you need to focus in on, really just maybe one. I really think that getting George Pickens and Brandon Aubrey are your priority. Everyone else is second to nothing. Like, you could just get that stuff done when you get it done, or if you don't get it done, is what it is. Now, you also have the other restricted free agents and Josh Butler and Reddy Stewart. I'm not going to talk about them a whole lot. They're just backups. I'm not super, enticed to re-sign these guys. It's just, hey, they come back, is what it is, especially with the tenders and stuff like that. Now, the big name that they need to finish re-signing, because they got done DeRon Bland, they got done Hunter Lipke, they got done Jake Ferguson. Tyler Smith is the next big name they need to get done. Point blank, period. Once you get him done, your offense is more or less done with big contracts, with the exception, of course, like I talked about, George Pickens and stuff like that. And that's where you can fully focus your attention defensively, which is the Cowboys' every intention to do so, is to rebuild this defense in a manner that can help them win a championship. So, before we close out, looking at the list total, whether that be the unrestricted free agents, the guys you brought in this year, brought back, whatever, I don't think this is a very deep free agency class where if you bring back just 2 guys, it's the end of the world and everyone else walks like, oh no. I think that for me at least, if you can focus on getting done George Pickens, if you can focus on getting done Brandon Aubrey, we're good. That's it. That's all the Cowboys need to do. Once they do that, we're straight. So I think that is where we are currently at as of this recording. So tell me what you guys think. Are there names that I brought up that are on this list that you think should be prioritized more? That you think, nah, we don't need to bring any of these guys back? Please tell me down below. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. I'll check out what you guys got to see in the comments section below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have a good one. Goodbye.